G'day, May 40 here. So much we still don't know about Wednesday night's crash in Washington, D.C., where it appeared that a U.S. military Blackhawk helicopter deliberately collided with an American Airlines flight, killing about 67 people. A lot we don't know, but one thing we do know is pretty clear. It was 100% the fault of the Blackhawk helicopter operator. This is not just my opinion. This is New York Magazine on Friday. The D.C. plane crash is no mystery. The helicopter pilot was clearly at fault. There's no great mystery as to which aircraft was at fault. It was quite clearly the Army Blackhawk helicopter that was not where it was supposed to be. While it may be the case that the tower was not properly staffed or the airport's resources are chronically overtaxed, neither of these things played a role in the crash that took the lives of 67 passengers and crew. Right? The control handling the aircraft in the Reagan Tower did not do anything wrong. Right? The American Airlines flight did not do anything wrong. Right? The air traffic controller was keeping track of the Blackhawk as it flew south along the Potomac through a narrow corridor called Route 4 that passed well under the approach path for runway 33. Donald Trump is right. This helicopter was way too high. Seeing that the plane and the helicopter were flying toward each other in opposite directions, the controller called the helicopter on the radio, asked if it had the plane in sight. The pilot replied in the affirmative and asked for visual separation, meaning that they would take responsibility for staying clear of the other aircraft. The tower granted it visual separation approved. So twice in the final 2 minutes of the flight, the air traffic control reached out to the helicopter to make sure that they were not going to run into the American Airlines flight. So at the moment of collision, the Blackhawk pilot had accepted responsibility for what was about to happen. Right? There's little ambiguity as to who bears responsibility for the collision. The person who bears responsibility for the collision is the person who was operating the helicopter at the time, and we now finally know who that was. And her name is Rebecca Lobach. She was a Biden administration aide. She was a gay lesbian activist. And the cover story is that the family needed time to grieve before they chose to release her name. But they were busy bees deleting all of Rebecca's social media accounts before releasing her name. So 64 paying commercial passenger lives lost because a U.S. Army pilot screwed up. Right? We have to wonder if Rebecca Lobach was fatally distracted by current political events. She was flying a grand total of 2 hours a week. She was serving as an aide to Joe Biden. Right? The family of Rebecca Lobach, the Blackhawk pilot, worked out the release of her name after deleting all of her social media accounts. Right? She was into gay lesbian pride. She had assumed a gay lesbian partner. She was helping Joe Biden, helping plan his events. She worked for the White House press secretary in the press shop. She was not a full-time pilot. It was something she did on occasion, 2 hours a week. Right, and there she is in the White House press room. So, U.S. Army Captain Rebecca Lobach, former Biden White House aide, LGBTQ plus advocate. And why on earth did she deliberately, it appears, take her helicopter under her control and drive it into that American Airlines flight? Like, what the heck is going on? So we do know that the Federal Aviation Administration is being sued because it turned away over 1,000 applicants who were highly qualified, but turned them away because they were white. Right? It denied 1,000 would-be air traffic controllers jobs because of diversity hiring targets. So the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit filed in 2015 suggested the Federal Aviation's obsession with diversity hiring and inclusion only ensured that an accident was likely to happen. So the FAA under the Obama administration dropped a skill-based system for hiring air traffic controllers, replaced it with a biographical assessment in a bid to boost the number of minority job applicants. So over 1,000 highly qualified applicants were turned down simply because they were white. Right? And the FAA's race-based hiring scheme for air traffic controllers certainly endangered public safety. All right, DEI means DIE.
Well, not everybody in this room is a lawyer, but I bet all of you have heard of Title VII, right? It's the thing that says you can't discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, or sex in employment. What you might not know is that there are two alternative definitions of what constitutes discrimination. And they're usually called disparate treatment and disparate impact. But what I would say is that the first, disparate treatment, that's actually discrimination. And disparate impact, that's something else entirely that has developed over the years and been made part of Title VII, but I think was never intended to be part of Title VII by Congress back in 1964 when they passed Title VII. So you know basically what actual discrimination, disparate treatment is. You know, if I'm an employer and two applicants come to me, one is white, one is African American. They've got very similar credentials, but let's say, you know, the African American has a little cut above. But if I were to take the position that even though I can see that the African Americans' qualifications are a little better, I'm going to hire the white because I just like working with whites. An obvious violation of the law, and that's disparate treatment. Disparate impact is in some ways the opposite. It's not about equal treatment. It's about equal results. And that's something very, very different. The idea is that if an employee, or rather an employer, sets a job qualification, and that particular qualification...
And obviously, given that different groups have different gifts, you're never going to have identical results in life unless you try to rig the game. You're maybe wondering, how is the elite media thinking about this story?
Question like that. You know, when the time is right, I will go to the site and thank the first responders, and I'll stand with the families of the victims, and that would be that. But this is a politician with very, very different instincts. Peter, is his response, and he's been nonstop responding to the crash for 2 days, does this hark back to the chaotic days of Trump 1?
Yeah. Well, Donald Trump is nothing like Anodyne. He's nothing like any other president. We've seen that before. Maybe after 4 years, we had kind of forgotten a little bit because we didn't see him every day in the same way. But you're right. He is his own kind of leader. He doesn't do the empathy thing. He doesn't do the feel your pain thing. He's not a Bill Clinton or a Ronald Reagan after challenge or any of that kind of stuff. And we saw that last time during COVID in particular. Remember, day after day, he got out there, and rather than talking about the human suffering of thousands of people dying per day, he went on the attack against Democrats, against his own scientists, against China, the World Health Organization, all of those. Essentially, that's what he did again this week with the air crash. Instead of coming out and saying, this is a time for all of us to pull together and figure out what happened, he instantly, within minutes, goes from the hour of anguish to really an hour of anger and aggression, in which he not only goes after his opponents, he name-checks them. Obama, Biden, Buttigieg. He talks about diversity as if that had anything to do with this crash without any evidence whatsoever. That's how he rolls, and he is not going to change because the conventions of Washington don't approve.
Why does he do it this way?
I don't know, other than I can tell you the impact, though, and someplace at the Pentagon, which, of course, was shocked over what happened. Right. We had the names of the three crew who were on the Blackhawk, and for the first time in the 20 years that I've been around the building, a family chose not to release the name of their loved one, asked the military to not release it. It turns out it was...
Turns out they wanted to scrub her social media accounts.
The woman on that helicopter. Now, I can't tell you the reasons, but I can tell you that at the Pentagon, it had an effect. You started to hear people talk, if I'm a woman or a minority pilot, are people going to assume that I'm only here because of diversity? Someone sent me a list of every crash that's now, I can't tell you the reasons, involving any kind of military vehicle, and said to me, count the women.
Okay, people aren't stupid. right? The reason they would ask these questions only if standards had been lowered on the basis of affirmative action, right? People don't assume that when you get a doctor, an accountant, a lawyer who's Jewish, that they are just there on the basis of affirmative action, right? The 1940s and the 1950s and even into the 1960s, you would assume, well, they had to overcome above average odds, perhaps, to get to where they are. People don't immediately assume that Jews have below levels of incompetence.
That's the kind of reaction that it's created.
I want a male-dominated military. I don't think I want women flying helicopters. Certainly not in combat. Men have much higher visual, spatial, higher IQ than women. Now, yes, individual women will have higher visual spatial IQ than individual men, but overall men have higher visual spatial IQ than women. It's a difference between seeing a man parallel park and a woman try to parallel park. Right? A lot of women have a lot of problems parallel parking.
Within the building that people are going to be judged not by their merits, and certainly a pilot is the merits are right there. A plane doesn't know your race or gender. And now we're having questions around whether a pilot will be judged on their flight.
Well, we do know that with regard to black doctors, the odds are approximately 90% that they needed affirmative action to get into medical school. The average test scores of blacks admitted into medical school in the United States are lower than the test scores of whites and Asians who applied and were rejected. So people aren't idiots, right, when it's obvious that through affirmative action you're less likely to get qualified people, right? People are correctly, rightly, accurately, normally, naturally, healthfully skeptical.
Flight hours on their performance because of this kind of...
I remember when I was at UCLA in the late 1980s, typically the people who got into UCLA who were white or Asian had a GPA well over 4. And when you would talk to black and Latinos who got into UCLA, they usually had a GPA a full grade point below that.
Kind of discourse.
Right.
As if that spotlight wasn't already there, right? It's what makes these attacks.
Why would the spotlight be there? Only because there's a competence problem. As soon as you start promoting on the basis of these are sacred identities, these are vulnerable groups who should be shielded from normal levels of accountability, scrutiny, and merit, right, then you lower standards and people naturally react.
Attacks about DEI and diversity and inclusion so sharp is the people who are non-white and non-male know that those biases are already ingrained for some Americans, and this only underscores and builds upon them.
Damn Americans with biases towards merit and accountability and people who are competent. Damn Americans with a bias towards competency.
You're right that there's a cost to the mis and disinformation that Trump has put forward. We saw it during the Hurricane Helene response when he talked about FEMA, and FEMA workers were endangered on the ground in some situations because of conspiracy theories pushed by the president. In situations like this, it's the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, that actually makes the announcements about potential things that could have gone wrong in plane crash scenarios. Trump broke with decades of precedent about that and just put forward conspiracies and conjecture.
Marc, hold your point for 1 minute. I want you to react to video of precisely what Ali's talking about. Donald Trump kind of freestyling on possible causes of the accident. Just watch this for 1 minute.
So you don't think that Donald Trump perhaps has access to information that you don't?
You could have slowed down the helicopter substantially. You could have stopped the helicopter. You could have gone up. You could have gone down. You could have gone straight up, straight down. You could have turned. You could have done a million different maneuvers. For some reason, it just kept going and then made a slight turn at the very end, and by that time it was too late.
Marc, I want to hear you on the DEI overlay of this whole controversy and on basically everything that's happening in Washington these days, because it's been a preoccupation of the Trump administration for the first 11 days of its time in office. The but going to this, it's what is the political utility for Donald Trump of?
What's the political utility for Donald Trump of telling the truth? Like, where's the political payoff? Why is this damn man saying truths that we elites say you should not say out loud? Why is he talking truth? What's the political utility, Marc, of telling the truth?
Going out and behaving like a radio DJ on drive time radio, talking about aviation accidents, or just sitting around a bar. YouTube commenter. What is the impulse? What is the effect?
I mean, look, that's not what we're used to a president of the United States doing. And you can talk all about DEI or Donald Trump's style or what have you. I mean, the fact is 60 or, a lot of people died not far from where we're sitting, tragically.
How do you know this had nothing to do with DEI? Was this pilot really the most qualified person to be flying that aircraft?
It's a fairly uncontroversial human response to just sort of sit with it, try to heal. I mean, every single president in history that I can...
Try to heal? What the hell? Why is that considered the best response? Like, healing schmealing. All right, that's healing is between you and your shrink. I don't need the president to help me heal. America doesn't need the president to help it heal.
Who has been through something like this goes by the same playbook. And I was reading one of the morning tip sheets today and said, well, that's the usual boring response. But this is Donald Trump's style. I don't think this is about style. I don't think it's about DEI. I think it's about, I don't know. I mean,
wait, why are you rushing to judgment? Why is the media rushing to judgment that this has nothing to do with DEI? Right? Perhaps the most responsible response right now is to say, we don't know if this had anything to do with DEI, right? That is an immensely respectable, reasonable, responsible approach. We don't know what it had to do with DEI, but from the moment Trump said that this was DEI related, the media rushed out there and said this had nothing to do with DEI, but the media doesn't know whether this had to do with DEI or not. I think there are reasonable basis for questioning if that female pilot was there purely on the basis of merit. I am skeptical that she was there purely on the basis of merit, but I want to be even-handed and open and say we don't know if this crash can be attributed in part or in main to DEI. We simply don't know. Ergo, why is the media rushing to judgment to state that the crash had nothing to do with DEI? How is the media rushing to judgment on DEI more responsible than Donald Trump, quote-unquote, rushing to judgment on DEI if, indeed, the president has no access to information that you and I don't? I suspect President Trump has access to information about this crash that we don't have.
I think it's just who he is. And look, it mimics a lot of his behavior in the first term in both campaigns. I mean, this in some ways is democracy at work because everyone knows what this guy was, and this is perfectly predictable. People voted for it.
Right. But what does it do to him politically? I mean, this is the question. Now that we're in it now. We're in the Trump administration. We're in the second term.
Oh, my God. What does it do to the president politically if he awkwardly, bluntly states an important truth? What does that do to the president politically?
Tragedy strikes again, this time very close to home. I'm Michael Smerconish here in Philadelphia. A medical jet carrying 6 people crashed into a Philly neighborhood, causing a massive explosion that affected nearby homes and vehicles. The small plane was carrying a pediatric patient and her mother, along with 4 crew members, a pilot, co-pilot, doctor, and medic. At this time, authorities cannot confirm any survivors from the crash. We're awaiting a news conference, perhaps this hour, from here in Philadelphia. As we get updates, we'll bring them to you. This all coming after the tragic Blackhawk.
So this Michael Smerconish CNN segment aired about 10 hours ago.
An American Airlines collision that killed 67 people near Reagan National Airport on Wednesday night. A chilling collision above the Potomac, upended after the consoler-in-chief pivoted and began playing the blame game and speculating while providing no evidence that diversity and hiring policies of prior administrations somehow caused this tragedy.
The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes. The FAA website shows that the agency's guidance on diversity hiring were last updated on March 23rd of 22. They wanted to make it even more so. And then I came in, and I assume maybe this is the reason. The FAA, which is overseen by Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a real winner.
Remember now, the effort had just changed from rescue to recovery.
They wanted to make
bodies were still being pulled out of the Potomac when he said that. Caitlin Collins then pressed the president.
We don't even yet know the names of the 67 people who were killed, and you are blaming Democrats and DEI policies and air traffic control and seemingly the member of the U.S. military who was flying that Blackhawk helicopter. Don't you think you're getting ahead of the investigation right now?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think with the names of the people, you mean the names of the people that are on the plane, you think that's going to make a difference?
Despite any evidence supporting his conjecture, the president doubled down, and with the support of the vice president, the secretary of defense, the secretary of...
Wait, Michael Smerconish, how do you know how much evidence is in the hands of the Trump administration? You don't have a freaking clue how much evidence is in the hands of the Trump administration with regard to this crash. Like, where the heck do you get the chutzpah to speak as though you know all the evidence that the Trump administration has that it hasn't yet disclosed?
Transportation, he produced a shiny object, DEI, which dominated the Thursday news cycle. Debate over DEI now filled airspace that would otherwise have been focused on the confirmation hearings occurring that day on Capitol Hill, featuring the most controversial remaining nominees of President Trump. There was Tulsi Gabbard, tapped to be Trump's director of national intelligence, who refused to say whether or not she thinks Edward Snowden is a traitor. FBI Director nominee Kash Patel, who fielded questions about a retribution and enemies list. RFK Jr., Trump's nominee to be the next Secretary of Health and Human Services, seemed to struggle a bit when answering a basic question about Medicare. Three nominees who could potentially be in charge of our security and health. They all took a back seat to a torrent of unproven rhetoric and speculation. That night, President Trump's unfounded speculation about DEI was welcomed on Fox.
Wait, how do you know it was unfounded? Right, the media saying that Trump saying that DEI had a role to play in this crash was unfounded. Right, aren't you just rushing to the very same thing that you're criticizing Trump for? You don't know on what basis he says that DEI played a role here.
News. And no doubt many Americans working jobs with limited bandwidth to verify their information. They went to bed thinking 67 people died because of a...
And how much bandwidth to verify information do our media elites have when they repeatedly state the falsehood that Donald Trump had no empirical basis for making his claims about DEI? The elite media has no idea what the Trump administration knows about this crash. None.
A government initiative which they think discriminates against whites and had caused some unfit minority to get hired for a job, resulting in negligence and costing lives.
Right, because we've never heard of that. We do know that the FAA turned away over 1,000 white applicants who are highly qualified to try to hire minority applicants who are not nearly as qualified. So why on earth would people think that DEI might produce suboptimal levels of efficiency?
I'm too cynical to accept coincidence. I think President Trump wanted to own the news cycle, like he wants to own every news cycle. And this...
So Michael Smerconish is not a leftist, right? He's pretty centrist, right? He strives to be fair. I read his novel about talk radio, right? I think I'll give him props for generally trying to be fair and even-handed.
Time, he sought the added political benefit of raising questions over whether a minority was at fault for the D.C. catastrophe. It brings me to today's poll question at Smerconish.com. Do you believe President Trump's spent 15 years in the Virginia Army National Guard, is a chief warrant officer, a combat gunner, a UH-60 Blackhawk pilot, Joe is deployed to Iraq, Guatemala.
Trainee, right? A trainee with approximately 500 hours of training, just like the female pilot of this Blackhawk that collided with American Airlines, based in Virginia. So it would be normal and natural for people to wonder if she was flying this particular Blackhawk helicopter.
Guatemala and Kuwait. She's also a transgender woman who transitioned while in service and coincidentally once worked as the digital media manager for Smerconish.com.
Okay, so she knows how the internet works. All right, she's not naive about the internet.
Now, go back to Monday. On Monday, President Trump signed an executive order directing newly confirmed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to implement a policy to come up with the means to preclude transgender personnel from the U.S. military, arguing that being transgender is not consistent with military ideals. When I read that, I invited Joe to be a guest on my SiriusXM radio program. On Tuesday, she wrote a moving piece about her experience. We published it on my website.
All right, and what's moving to one person is absolutely revolting to another. So she chose to make the most intimate details of her life, including her intimate sexual feelings, right, public. Not many members of the military do this. I would think that it would be very ill-advised for members of the military or members in any responsible position to make the most painful, intimate sexual details of their life public to try to score political points. I think that's extremely ill-advised. Why would this be okay for a Blackhawk pilot, right? Someone who's operating in such a sensitive area to make her anguish and most intimate sexual feelings public.
And then on Wednesday, she joined me for a national radio interview on SiriusXM.
Okay, so on the very day of the crash, she spoke on a national Sirius FM radio show about the most intimate sexual details of her life, and then provided all sorts of reasons why people would then ask, was this person who was promoting their sexual transition, was this person flying the particular Blackhawk in D.C. on the night of the crash?
It was that night that the tragedy occurred on the Potomac.
And about 2 hours after the tragedy on the Potomac, people started raising questions on social media. Was Joe Ellis in this particular Blackhawk? And Michael Smerconish and Joe Ellis waited 36 hours to make a simple response. No, this wasn't Joe Ellis, right? Were they trying to milk the maximum of victimhood points that they could? I don't know. Why? Why, Michael Smerconish, people were contacting you for 36 hours before you said anything publicly. Right? You could have ended the anguish for Joe Ellis immediately. You could have just responded to all these social media inquiries about Joe Ellis on Wednesday night. You could have ended it right there, but it built and it built. It built all through Thursday. And it finally, on Thursday about 5:30 p.m., I commented on it, and I asked the question, where is Joe Ellis? Because you had a topic that was rapidly ascending to the most talked about topic on the internet. And you could have ended that Wednesday evening, Michael Smerconish. Why didn't you end it Wednesday evening? Why didn't Joe Ellis end it Wednesday evening? At the very least, why didn't you end it Thursday morning? Why did you allow it to go on for 36 hours? Why? Why did you do that to her, Michael?
And by Thursday night and Friday morning, Joe Ellis was falsely accused of...
Well, most of the social media posts that I saw asking, did she have anything to do with this particular helicopter? Almost all the social media posts I saw were just asking. And that's all I did on Thursday night. Asked, was this Joe Ellis? Nowhere did I say this was Joe Ellis in this particular Blackhawk. I said, was it Joe Ellis? Michael, why didn't you clear the air Wednesday night? Michael, you had all Thursday to clear the air. Why didn't you clear the air, Michael? Why were you fine with this speculation? People were asking you Wednesday evening if this was Joe Ellis. Why didn't you say anything then? Why did you just ride the tornado?
Piloting the Black Hawk helicopter that collided with the American Airlines jet. And then absolutely horrific headlines like this. Offensive, conspiracy-fueled tweets ensued that went...
And why didn't you stop it? You had the ability to stop it. As soon as the correct information came out, the same people who had speculated about Joe Ellis turned around and said, hey, it's not true. The people who were asking questions turned around and said, no, it's not true. Or they deleted their accounts, or they took down the questions. It ended immediately. Right? The speculation that the pilot of the Blackhawk that collided with the plane on Wednesday night was Joe Ellis, that speculation ended immediately as soon as Joe Ellis spoke up. So why didn't Joe Ellis speak up Wednesday night? She was your media manager. She is wise to the ways of the internet. Why didn't you speak up, Michael Smerconish? People were asking you for 36 hours before you said anything.
Viral. Joe Ellis was the #2 most trending topic in the United States on X.
And you had the ability to stop that in its tracks 36 hours before it happened. For 36 hours, you waited and did nothing, Michael Smerconish. You did nothing. You just allowed it to build. And given that the U.S. military would not release the name of the Blackhawk pilot, given that you promoted a story on your national show with identifying details that made Joe Ellis a plausible person for piloting this particular Blackhawk, right? Didn't you have a responsibility to nip this in the bud? Why did you let this build and build and build, Michael? Why did you do that, Michael?
Late Friday morning with more than 90,000 posts, according to Trends24, a website that tracks.
Yes, and in similar situations going forward, the same thing's going to happen. Right? When official sources refuse to reveal the identity of someone who appears to have committed a deliberate act of mass murder that killed 67 innocent people, and you hosted a person that day on your national show with all sorts of details that plausibly make her the possible pilot who did this horrible, horrible, horrible thing, right? It is inevitable that people will ask, hey, what's going on here?
Trending topics. I suspect the visibility that came from the radio interview, along with the article we published at Smerconish.com, put Joe's name in play.
Yes, it did. If she had never gone on your show, this would never have happened to her, Michael. Did you explain to her that there are downsides to publicity? Did you explain to her that when you bear the most intimate details of your life, that people will then speculate and gossip about you? Did you let her know the price of publicity? And did she think that she would get to take part in a national conversation in a prominent role and that there'd be no downsides to this, that there'd be no price to pay, that she would be free from speculation and gossip? You played a significant role in this situation, Michael. What responsibility are you taking, Michael?
Such that she became an easy target for some of the twist.
Yes, you created this situation, Michael, and you had the ability to have ended it right when it got started Wednesday night. It's as though you found a fire, Michael Smerconish. You found a fire just like a fire in the Pacific Palisades. But instead of putting the fire out, Michael Smerconish, you let it build and build and build, and you did nothing. You let the fire burn, Michael. Why did you let the fire burn, Michael? Why did Joe Ellis let the fire burn for 36 hours? Joe Ellis, Michael Smerconish, anyone who knew Joe Ellis, anyone in possession of the facts could have put out this fire Wednesday night. Instead, by refusing to do the most simplest announcement, right, this grew to be the #2 trending topic on social media. And in large part, that's on you, Michael Smerconish. That's on you, Joe Ellis. That's on you, anyone who is in possession of the facts and didn't speak out.
Voices that have outsized influence online. Joe became collateral damage, linked, blamed.
Yes, as does anyone who takes on hot-button, controversial issues, spills intimate details about their sex life and their sexual identity and their most painful and intimate struggles. Anyone who retails that publicly, who publishes that story publicly, who goes on a national radio show to promote themselves and their story publicly, there's always a downside to that. Right? You want to get into a hot-button national political controversy and spill intimate details of your life, right? You become fair game for gossip and speculation, and if you can't handle that, then don't get into the fire. You invited her into the fire, Michael, knowing that this was perhaps a highly vulnerable person. Why did you do that? Were you willing to wreck her life for the sake of having a couple of what you thought were compelling segments? Right? Why did you play with her well-being like that, Michael?
Via high-speed internet to attract...
I am increasingly careful about the people I allow onto my show. Right? I don't allow these kind of vulnerable people onto my show because I don't want to see them get destroyed. To me, there are higher things than ratings on my show. So my show is a lot more compelling when I have people spilling their guts on my show. But I've largely stopped that because so many of them become then overly vulnerable and they suffer so much damage that, to me, Michael, there are more important things than ratings.
Tragedy with which she had nothing to do. Collateral.
Had nothing to do. She chose to be part of a national debate. All right, Elliott Blatt, what's going on, man?
Blessings, Luke. Can you hear me?
I can, sir.
Okay. All right. Good to hear. Didn't expect to get on so quite so soon, but all right. I'm here. I'm not queer.
We'll take your word for it.
We're talking Smerconish, bro. That's all.
Yes, sir.
All right. So just a little tidbit to inject into this conversation. So when I lived in Boston in the aughts, there was a sort of, we had a station, a FM station. It was called TKK FM Talk. So it was basically kind of like AM radio, right-wing content that usually happens only on the AM band, but they were trying to make it work on the FM band. You know, I don't know if they've done this around the country, but this is what it was in Boston. And it was pretty popular. And they had this host who was sort of, it's kind of like a right-wing libertarian type, very bombastic. I think he eventually got canceled because he made some unflattering remarks about the Mexican community that sort of finally pushed him over the edge. And so, nevertheless, he sort of put out the basic, right-wing fare, as it were, and it was either that or NPR, bro. So you toggle back between the two. And so I would listen here and there, and he had a lot of charisma. It was an interesting show. But every now and again, he'd have to go on vacation, and he'd have someone fill in for him when he was there. And who filled in for him?
Michael Smerconish?
Michael Smerconish, Luke. Exactly. And so basically, Michael Smerconish would come on and essentially pretend to be a right-winger.
Well, he was.
Right?
He changed. He used to be right-winger.
Oh, okay. So he had some sort of conversion of some sort?
Yeah. But he's still not a leftist. He is fairly centrist.
Okay. Well, flash forward like 10 years later, I'm thinking it might have been an NPR show. It might have been a sort of lefty show, but there he was, subbing, but this time for a left-wing guy, and just putting out the old left-wing talking points. And so it just made it clear to me that talk radio was a job. You just played a role. That's the conclusion I came away with.
Well, he did write a novel about it. I think it's called Talk Radio. And it's about someone who gets into talk radio and is a typical right-wing talk radio host until he meets his comeuppance.
So what was his
it's fairly autobiographical. I'm sorry?
What was his conversion event? What switched him out of right-winghood?
Yeah, it's the kind of the rote nature of talk radio. Usually depends upon a kind of a top 40 formula where you play the hits. Only the hits aren't music. The hits are your talking points that correspond with the audience. And so he got discouraged with how shallow that was.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Fair enough. But this is a terribly amusing story. How did you first what gave you the first inkling that it was this tranny that crashed the plane?
Okay, so about 20 hours after I wasn't planning to do a show on Thursday. And then I was just looking at Twitter, and there was all this talk about Joe Ellis, and she just appeared on Michael Smerconish's show that day, the same day as the crash. She appeared on his show, and she was based in Virginia, and she had 500 training hours. So there are all these plausible details that made her a plausible candidate to have been the chopper pilot. And then I did some further research, and I couldn't find any other Blackhawk pilot trainee talking about such intimate details of their life. This is not the normal thing. So this was a freaky occurrence. It had been, by the time I decided to do a show on it, it had been 21 hours since the first social media post had gone up inquiring about the whereabouts of Joe Ellis and inquiring to Michael Smerconish, where is Joe Ellis? And there'd been no response for 21 hours. And given that the U.S. military, in a highly, highly, highly unusual move, had not released the name of the female pilot, and this was growing to be close to the number one most talked about topic on social media, I decided I want to talk about this.
So why do you think Smerconish held back? You have any speculation?
Probably laziness, didn't want to be bothered. Second, it made the story even more dramatic that if he can weigh in and say, look how irresponsible people are on social media.
Yeah.
Like, you could say the reason that Barack Obama never released his birth certificate. Barack Obama could have short-circuited all the birther talk if he'd simply released his birth certificate in 2009. But he apparently received benefit from making parts of the right wing look stupid by pursuing this bogus agenda. And I would suspect that Smerconish and Joe Ellis, that they may well have thought, look how idiots these nuts online, how irresponsible they are. There's probably an unconscious or conscious desire to milk the victimhood points of just letting this rage to become close to the number one most discussed topic on social media before 36 hours after the first inquiries finally speaking out. And it's so effortless to speak out. Like, if something would require a great deal of effort, then I would understand why people wouldn't do it. But when she was his former media manager, so she's quite savvy with regard to the internet. So Wednesday evening, she could have posted on her Facebook, hey, it's not me. But it appears... The appearance is that she was milking the victimhood points.
Well, do you think like Smerconish or someone, someone else reached out to her and said, just, hold your peace. Your enemy's making a mistake.
No. No, I don't think it was anything explicit as that because it would just be, I don't think so. It would be too dangerous and getting found out that way. I don't believe that. I just think that also I want to share another possibility that Joe Ellis was simply in shock, that finding yourself the focus of so much social media attention, could send you into an immobilizing state of shock. It's possible that she had other obligations that kept her away from the internet for that period of time. But there are people who know her. Right, there would have been dozens of people who knew that was not her. For some reason, nobody wanted to speak out. It appeared like a deliberate attempt to milk the drama. I'm not saying it was. There could be other factors.
Yeah, that's an interesting possibility. I hadn't considered that. And shock is real. I've experienced shock a couple of times. It sort of freezes you. It immobilizes you. I had
go ahead.
Like car accident.
Yeah.
You go into a state of not thinking clearly and you're looking for the safest space. You just want to retreat to the safest space.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And So yeah, no, I can. And now that you raise that possibility, I can understand it. Sure.
But there is no escape from this kind of speculation. If people in charge, if we do not have information about someone who appears to have carried out a mass murder, and people in charge are not giving us the identity of the person, even though they give us the other identities of other people who are involved, the other pilots, but for some reason they withhold this pilot, there is an inevitable human need to speculate and to gossip until we find out. And so there is no way to not have this situation again and again and again. If you don't get official confirmation, if highly unusual withholding of names and information in what looks like a mass terror event, people will inevitably fill the void with speculation. And that's the way it is. If people were filling the void with speculation about me, I would, as quickly as possible, try to say, no, this is not me, and here's the evidence on which I'm stating this. I feel like we have a moral obligation to, if we can, easily and effectively remove anxiety and feverish speculation from people.
Do you still believe it was an intentional act?
It just, I believe it looks that way. I'm not enough of an expert. It just as it looked like the Secret Service allowed the shooter to get off a bunch of shots at Donald Trump before they finally decided to take him out. I mean, that's just what it looks like looking at the video. It looked, just looking at numerous snippets of different angles of the crash, every one I look at looks to me and to thousands of Americans as though it was deliberate. It appears deliberate, just like it appears that the Secret Service deliberately allowed someone to take a bunch of shots at Donald Trump before they finally decided to take him out.
Yeah, I've seen the video. It's like, I'm certainly not opposed to the idea that it was intentional, but I think there are plausible, to me, explanations that don't involve intent. But, I spent maybe 5 minutes looking at this, so I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. But it does sort of highlight this internet phenomenon where things happen and then boom, everyone's got their 2 cents. And you have no sort of direct information base, but you're supposed to be able to parse all of these explanations. And there's a certain amount of incentive to have the most dramatic and shocking explanation rise to the fore,
Or the most parsimonious. The only other Blackhawk helicopter who was in the national conversation the day of the crash was Joe Ellis. There were no other Blackhawk helicopters giving interviews that day or for the previous months. Like, I was searching through Google, and I couldn't find any other interviews with Blackhawk pilot trainees. It just is not done. So she put herself in the national conversation, and people did not have in their heads the names of anyone else. She was based in Virginia. She had 500 training hours. She put forward information that made her pop into thousands of people's heads, driving feverish speculation that was inevitable once she decided to go public with information that made her the plausible candidate.
Good point. Kip has joined, it seems.
Kip, did you want to weigh in here?
No, that was a good pickup. I was listening earlier, and I guess you were early to the party. It wasn't a good thing you were early to the party on the Smerconish thing, but you were early to the party on the other thing about the DEI hire, just like Trump, right?
It's an interesting topic, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. But can I kind of mention, like, on a big scale? I don't know if you guys feel it, but don't you feel like we're kind of living through some sort of like a shattering? I don't know if it's the quickness of the information or the amount of information, but information goes so fast across the world now in such a furious fashion. It seems like all norms are being shattered. All identities are being shattered. All ideologies and perceptions are being shattered. Right now, it seems like the left wing is completely shattered and trying to pick up the pieces right now. And once we get over the euphoria of winning after 3 or 4 months, we too are going to face some shattering of like, where do we go from here? Can you guys speak to that? Do you feel it?
I certainly don't feel shattered. I think that the situation is constantly changing, and so the situation has changed since the internet, since the rise of social media. So I don't feel a shattering, but I feel a vibe shift, and I feel like the world is constantly changing, and I feel like we're entering a world where you might be in a viable business on Monday, and then by Friday, your business is no longer economically viable due to changes in technology. But
right.
Elliott, you want to weigh in?
Well, interesting you say that. I just watched a video by Patrick Boyle, and he had an interesting take on this. What's the new Chinese AI?
DeepSeek. Yeah, I saw that video.
DeepSeek.
I haven't seen the video, but I want to watch it. What did he say?
Yeah. Well, just put the numbers in context. So NVIDIA lost 17% in one day. 17% of NVIDIA is $600 billion. $600 billion is more than Exxon. Okay?
Yeah.
So a company, does that make sense to you? Do those numbers make sense to you?
Yep.
So 600, basically, ExxonMobil, a company that provides a valuable commodity to millions of people, that value was erased in one day by the release of an AI competitor built on chips that weren't NVIDIA. Are we living in a real world here, or are we living in some sort of massive fever dream?
But you see,
real. Go ahead, Ken.
That's a perception. That's the world's perception about one subject just being shattered in one day. You see that?
Yeah.
And that shattering
had these people listened to Blatt, they would never have been involved in NVIDIA, and they would have been $600 billion richer. Can you imagine that?
Well, I still think NVIDIA is going to get the last laugh. NVIDIA has become an incredibly valuable company over the past few years. I think that this was an overreaction to DeepSeek, and I do believe that the AI revolution is real, and that it will be approximately as significant as the conventional wisdom says.
Well, if that's true, right, Elon is in a pickle, because either AI is this massive labor-saving device worthy of billions and billions of dollars of investment that's going to obviate the needs of millions and millions of programmers, or it's not. And if it's not, then we need to keep on with this H-1B visa scheme. But if it is, there's no need for these H-1Bs. So to me, it seems like a very untenable position.
Well, not really. Elon is not making H-1Bs a major focus of his attention. He weighed in once, twice. He weighed in for a week or two. But if there was never another H-1B visa allowed in the United States, his life would go on and his fortune wouldn't be that diminished. It was a hot button topic with Elon for a week, maybe 2 weeks, but right now he's got the keys to the kingdom. I mean, considering the enormous influence that he is wielding over the U.S. federal government, the U.S. federal government, for the first time, thanks to Elon, emailed all 2.3 non-military employees, 2.3 million. That had never been done before. He has had an unprecedented effect on the U.S. government, and compared to what he's doing, the H-1B visa issue does not look quite as big as it did 2 weeks ago.
Is that to me, or is that? Did you want to say something, Kip?
No, I don't really know enough about the H-1B to add anything to it.
Okay, well, the way the whole H-1B thing has been framed is that AI is real and it's valuable, and it's going to supplant the need for hiring lots of IT professionals or a lot of programmers at the very least, because the task of writing code has now become exponentially easier, right? And so the whole justification for H-1B is that there's just so many programming jobs and we need them. We need these people from India and we need the H-1B program. And white kids are too expensive, therefore it must persist. So,
well, another angle is that precisely as the application of AI becomes less expensive, the overall demand will grow, justifying the need for making an economic justification for more programmers because of this enormous demand.
You're making the what I call the hardwood flooring argument. You know what that is?
No, I do not.
Okay, so in Boston, there was this sort of there's a big Vietnamese population, and they sort of had cornered the market on the hardwood flooring installation and refinishing market. So they cornered this particular niche in the economy, and they were known for getting this job done incredibly cheaply. And because they could do it so cheaply, everybody wanted it. And it created this, it expanded the market. Because it was done so cheaply, everybody wanted it. It became sort of like the status symbol to have nicely finished hardwood floors. And so all the Vietnamese were hired, but there was still this sort of spillover demand that was unmet by Vietnamese. And this sort of broadened the market. And a lot of non-Vietnamese sort of got to get in on the action because there weren't enough Vietnamese. So like, as something gets, there's a paradox here. There's a name for the paradox. In fact, Boyle mentions it. But as something gets really, really cheap, everybody starts to want it, and then therefore, then the price goes up.
Yeah, yeah. Now,
so that's sort of the argument you're making with it.
Well, it's not so much the price goes up, but because the price goes down, there's increased demand, and the increased demand creates an even bigger total dollar demand. And so there may be a period where there is an extreme demand for certain high-level programs. Now, I would prefer total end to immigration and no H-1B visas. That's my position.
Can I ask you guys? I noticed this line of thinking, which was America needs chips. Chips are the future. Ergo, we got to build these chips in Taiwan. And we all know that's right there in the heart of China's sphere of influence. So tell me why chips must be built in Taiwan and why they can't be built in Puerto Rico or Guam or Washington State.
Well, no one is saying we need chips and they must be built in Taiwan. There is nobody in the world who is saying that. What is, in fact, the major talking point in American politics over the past 6 years is that we need computer chips and they must be built in the United States. Now, Puerto Ricans don't have the identical gifts as the Taiwanese. The Taiwanese are people with particular gifts, and the Taiwanese government has invested quite thoughtfully and substantially in building up the world's premier chip industry. Elliott, can you mute or something? Yeah. So the Taiwanese have made themselves the world's premier chip manufacturers, and if the United States is to remain the world's leader in technology, we need assured ability to get the world's best computer chips. And because we don't want to have to rely on Taiwan, we're spending tens of billions of dollars to try to grow that industry in the United States. Now, it requires no thinking or dilemma to me why these chips aren't coming out of West Africa or Central America, right? Only particular people in a particular structure with particular levels of investment are going to be able to produce the world's best computer chips. Kip?
Right. Well, it's so we agree these chips should be made in America, right?
Yes.
And we're stirring up the hornet's nest if we want to make them there. That'd be like China buying some vital thing in Cuba. in
Right.
Havana. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. The other thing I wanted to get yours and Elliott's opinion was, who makes the call? And I maybe it's a G7, maybe it's a G20 meeting, but where is the call made that everywhere, every white nation from Canada to America to Sweden to England and everywhere in between needs to be browned up? And it's like, okay, you'll take Indians and Pakistanis, and you guys will take the people from the Central America, and who's making these calls, and why is it that we don't have a say in the matter?
Well, you do, but the average American is not for a whites only nation. And I'll give you one example and tell you how this plays with the average white person. Number one, most importantly, most citizens of the Can you mute if you're going to cough and splutter? Okay. So, no problem. So the average citizen of the United States, of England, of Canada and Australia and New Zealand does not think of himself primarily as white. That's not a key part of his identity. He thinks of himself as Australian, French, German, Canadian. And so this racial category that you're using is not the way that most people operate, even those people who are white. Particularly those people who are white are probably the least likely to take as their primary identity that they're white. Second, let me just give you a story. So there was a cricket player of color who was unable to play for South Africa in the 1960s because he was of color. So because he wouldn't get to play cricket at the highest level simply because he was of mixed race, he moved to England and he became an English citizen. And he was such a great cricket player that he made it to the elite team that represented England. And England was setting off on a tour of South Africa, and South Africa canceled the tour because the English side contained one person of some black ancestry. Most people didn't think that was great. That didn't play well with virtually everybody who became acquainted with the story, and that was the event that precipitated South Africa from being banned from international sports, because your average person, when they hear that South Africa or any country is refusing to play your nation's team because your nation's team contains a person who's of mixed race, right? Your average white person finds that revolting. And the reason that the United States and England and the Western world has removed barriers to non-white immigration is because most people don't want that sort of situation. Most people don't want strict racial barriers up. Most people don't want separate drinking fountains for black and white people. Most people don't want people denied the ability to visit the United States or to play sports with Americans on the basis of race. So you may not like these attitudes by most people in the Western world, but this is the majority of opinion.
You think that the people of Canada wanted to have 40% non-Canadians in their midst all of a sudden?
I'm telling you, most people in Canada do not regard themselves as white as their primary identity. For you, it's a vitally important thing. It isn't for them. Most Canadians, when they hear that a country like South Africa wouldn't play a national team representing England because there's one person of mixed race on it, and therefore we're not going to play them. All right, most people in Canada, the United States, France, Germany, in the West find that revolting.
Well, Elliott, any opinion on how all of a sudden all the white nations needed to be browned up and they seem to have no say-so on the matter? Luke seems to think they had more of a say-so. What do you say?
Well, I'll answer a story with another story. So long time ago, I was playing chess in Boston, and we were playing chess outside in the courtyard, and this family, this what do they call them? The not SUVs, but the big people mover type vehicles, the Toyota. I forgot the brand name. Like this family of Somalis goes by, driving this giant people mover, and I'm like, and it's like, everyone starts to speculate, how do these people get here? And who's paying for this giant car? And are these people working? We started just lightly tossing this around as a discussion topic, and we couldn't fathom how this phenomenon would happen. But we never thought it was a trend. We just thought it was this weird one-off situation where these people who couldn't speak English somehow had a middle-class existence in America. And who was paying? So one of these guys just says, I'm sure we're paying for it somehow. He just sort of burst out. He's like just a normal guy, And it just sort of lodged in my mind as an event to contemplate. And this is like the early aughts, right? So I had nobody had an idea that this trend was so big and broad. And then suddenly, probably 2016 or something, I think people started recognizing how big the trend was. And this is what occasioned, the rebellion on the internet, at least, that gave rise to Trump.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking back to some of the people, Indian, Pakistani, some of these people that had, moved to England. And when they were raised, some of these people were now 50 and 60 years old, but they were raised with their parents telling them on day one that enjoy it while you're here, get you some negotiable skills, that you can carry with you, because one day there's a fair chance they're going to say, you guys' time is come and it's time for you to go. Okay, and that's the mentality those people are raised with. So ethnically speaking, they are what they are first, and they're English second. You get what I'm saying? And another thing I might want to add to that, because that's why I'm telling you that American spirit might be gone. Another thing I got to thinking about is I was seeing old pictures from the Gilded Age. And it dawned on me that up till about 1890, 1895, I was seeing all these pictures, and they were just all, white faces working in these factories or whatever. And they were probably not working. That was the era of the robber barons, so they probably weren't making much money. So I'm thinking, what's in it for them? What's in it for them? What's in it for them? And then it sort of dawned on me that Darwinism hadn't really taken hold completely then. So they still kind of thought they were, us, this English, Scottish, Welsh, original stock. Somehow we're connected. We're sort of a union going all the way back to Adam and Eve. And I mean, with the waves that came after them, that was over this. That was over, so whatever maybe communal drive there was to, the original, maybe make America great or whatever, it had something that they thought they were connected to Adam and Eve. Does that make sense, or am I going off the rails here? Do y'all understand where I'm telling you that connection to the country, to the land, to the people? It's gone. It's gone. You want to speak to those points, either one of you?
I don't have anything. I've talked about this ad infinitum. Elliott, did you want to add anything? I'm gonna.
Well, one thing I what kept saying makes me remember is back in the early 80s, I remember there were factories in New England that made shoes. They made New Balance sneakers. And there were places that were actually producing, manufactured goods in America. And it was a different place. That made America in a very different place. Now we just assume any manufacturing is obviously being done overseas, and that this can go on ad infinitum without any consequence. Both, it may, that there's no sort of national security risk. Speaking about chips, if all of our chips are made in Taiwan and then China invades Taiwan, where are chips coming from? If China's truly an enemy of the United States, there is a national security dimension related to forfeiting your manufacturing base. And there's no economic incentive currently to talk about that, except for Trump. And Trump has basically, proposed what to me was the unthinkable of this giant tariff regime that may potentially thoroughly disrupt the economy for a period of time, for a long period of time. So I don't know about this. I don't have any economic skills or expertise, but this is sort of the anti-free market dogma that I was raised on. What do you think?
Okay, well, I think I want to move on. So, Kip, make this your final words for this evening.
Oh, final words? I don't know, man. I was just thinking about, the original signers of the Declaration of Independence. And if they were to, come along today through a time machine and see the porn and drugs and degeneracy and just the ethnic makeup that we've become, totally incapable of an intelligent democracy, they'd probably say we needed to be ruled. Do I have to end it there, Luke?
Yep, we'll carry on another time. Thanks, Kip, and thanks, Elliott. Okay. Like many of you, I was watching a superb documentary the other night about the Australian cricket team in the 1960s. Whoa. 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 What the heck, guys? What's with this wild music? Cricket in the 1960s, winds of change? What the hell?
The 1960-61 Test Series between Australia and the West Indies is universally regarded as the greatest Test Series ever played. The two captains, Richie Benaud and Frank Worrell, led from the front, and all the players responded accordingly. The first Test in Brisbane saw a sensational finish. With victory in sight, Australia lost 3 quick wickets. When only 2 balls remained in the match, scores were tied. Australia needed 1 run, the West Indies 1 wicket.
I thought to myself, how will I feel now if Wes bowls a no ball? And that means Australia win a test with 1 ball to go. I could see the headlines. So as he walked past me with the ball going back to his bowling mark, I said, Wes, don't forget your so-and-so foot. And he looked at me and grinned.
I thought he was being very nice to me, but now that in retrospect, I believe old Igor is so cunning, he would probably didn't want to call me.
All will bow decline. And here's the single that wins the match for Australia. He's out! He's ready! Down there! He's got the sound down! Oh, it's a tie.
History was made when, for the first time, a Test match ended in a tie.
We were stunned, I think, that the result was a tie. And it happened so quickly. We lost those wickets so quickly in the last, second last over and last over.
I wouldn't like to make any forecasts on the possible outcome of the series, but I'm hoping that we play attractive cricket throughout. And it does seem that both teams are prepared to play it, and the spectators should benefit.
Richie? Bob, I think they might all be ties.
So one reason that the West became more racially diverse is that many people in the West were highly impressed by people of color. The people who led the 1960s civil rights revolution, who were people of color, came across in an impressive way on TV.
With the inspirational leadership of the two captains, Benaud and Worrell, Australia and the West Indies played attractive cricket, and the crowds lapped it up. There was another nail-biting finish in the fourth test in Adelaide, when last wicket pair Lindsay Klein and Slasher Mackay batted through the final session and managed to force a draw.
Hall bowls it, and Mackay's hit high up in the body. It's all over! It's a draw! It's a draw!
A world record crowd of 90,800 packed into the Melbourne Cricket Ground to witness the series-deciding fifth test. There were moments of high drama.
The bail is on the ground, and Alexander is certain that Grant has been bowled, and the umpires decide to hold a conference. They rule not out, to the amazement of the West Indians.
The decision of the two umpires is this, that neither of us could tell why that bail was off.
In the end, Australia just snuck home to win the series, but it was cricket that was the real winner. Symbolic of the moment, a perpetual trophy was named in honour of the visiting captain, Frank Worrell, the first black man to captain the West Indies on tour.
The World Trophy is very symbolic. It is symbolic of two great teams meeting.
Right, that was the highly racist 1961 Australians celebrating the first black captain of the West Indies, celebrating a black team from the West Indies, and just going to extraordinary lengths to welcome them because they were such good blokes.
And playing the best cricket that they can play. And much to the crowd receiving that cricket with approbation. You know, it didn't matter if you're West Indian or Australian.
The West Indies recorded the unprecedented honour of a ticker-tape farewell. Over 500,000 people turned out in the streets of Melbourne.
Right, this is 1961, white Australia, loving this black West Indies team, giving them a ticker-tape parade, just an unprecedented parade, celebrating this black team, applauding this black team, singing songs, praising and loving this black team in 1961, white Australia.
Melbourne, just to say thank you. They may have lost the series, but they had won the hearts of the Australian public. It was a triumph for Frank Worrell. He had managed to unify the diverse nature of West Indies cricket into one cohesive force.
It was not only a success, it was a huge success. If it had failed, the setback for West Indian cricket development would have been enormous. But the success of it, on the other side, meant that it was established then that West Indies would always then have a captain picked on merit and picked as, whether he was professional, amateur, blue, white, black, brown, whatever, that the captain would always be picked on merit.
Australia's next assignment was to win an Ashes series on English soil for the first time since Bradman's Invincibles in 1948. Over 40 minutes, when the man of the moment, D'Oliveira, got the breakthrough.
He's out. Well, there we are. There's the first wicket. D'Oliveira has got it. An involuntary sort of shot from Jarman. Seemed to me he was withdrawing his bat too late.
England then brought on left-arm spinner Derek Underwood, who was a specialist bowler in these conditions.
He's out. Caught by Brown. Doesn't matter about the fours or sixes. Runs don't matter at all. Ooh, he's out. Is he caught? Look at Brown. Look at Dave Brown. He's gone. And that was a better catch.
Coming in round the wicket this time, Underwood. And he got him. Bowled him. Off stump. Knocked out of the ground. And Australia are 120 for 9 with just one wicket to go and 10 minutes and a half left. Inverarity has been there for 4 hours, 10 minutes. A superb innings for his country. Appeal, he's out! He's out, WW! England have won, and the series is drawn.
D'Oliveira left the Oval muttering under his breath, "I did it. That'll show them. They must pick me now." And they didn't.
There was outrage when D'Oliveira was left out of the England side to tour South Africa. However, when an original selection, Tom Cartwright, withdrew from the squad due to injury, D'Oliveira was named as his replacement. South Africa's Prime Minister, John Vorster, withdrew the invitation to the MCC and the tour was cancelled.
There was an outcry because a certain gentleman of colour was omitted on merit by the MCC selection committee. From then on, sir, D'Oliveira was no longer a sportsman, but a cricket ball.
Well, I think it's a tragedy for cricketer this has happened. Probably didn't want it this way, but the game itself is going to suffer. insofar that probably two of the greatest cricketing countries of the world will not be playing in a series. This is a great tragedy that's come out of all of this.
The team, as constituted now, is not the team of the MCC. It is the team of the anti-apartheid movement.
D'Oliveira's place in history was assured. Far beyond cricket terms, he was now a political figure of the first order, and before long South Africa truly were out in the cold. The whole world now saw the evil of the regime. It took a long time, but D'Oliveira was the cardinal figure.
In the summer of 1968-69, the West Indies toured Australia. There were high hopes that this tour would recapture the magic of the 1960-61 series. The players were even driven in a motor cavalcade.
Right, so most people would react badly to South Africa saying, no, we're not going to play England in cricket because England has one player of colour. And most people would react badly if, say, your favourite football team wouldn't play another football team because that other football team had someone of some element of racial heritage, right? So the apartheid case did not go over with the general public in the West. It was not popular. And that is a large reason that apartheid in various forms fell apart around the Western world. On the other hand, right, there's all sorts of reasons why people naturally racially segregate, but they don't like it polluting sport, right? Most people in America didn't like Jim Crow laws. They didn't like the idea of whites and blacks having to drink from separate water fountains.
In the president's unfounded theories and attempt to divert attention away from real conversations about who's going to lead our country and what truly happened in the crash. And now she'll forever represent a cautionary tale of how the combination of loose talk and trigger fingers on keypads can sully a person's reputation.
And she'll also always serve as an example of how dangerous it is to try to use intimate sexual details of your life to try to score political points and imagine that there won't be any blowback, that there won't be any negative side to that you can just go on a national radio show and publish an essay detailing very intimate portions of your life in a highly charged, controversial, hot-button issue where you're going up to oppose the President of the United States, who is in an ascendant period, and imagine that there could be no negative consequences? How naive.
And subject them to online ridicule, scorn, and threats.
So just imagine that you think that you can weigh in on a hot-button issue and then be entirely protected from online scorn. Right? How silly would you have to be? There's a good rule for life. Don't share anything that you would not be at ease with people gossiping about. I share a great deal of my own private life, and then you don't see me coming on here and complaining, oh, people are scorning me, people are mocking me, people are ridiculing me for all sorts of very intimate details that I retailed about my own life. Right? If you don't want people at work gossiping about you, if you don't want people in your church gossiping about you, then don't reveal things about yourself that are likely to provoke salacious gossip. We tend to have a significant role in our own misery.
Joining me now is Joe Ellis. Nice to see you, Joe. How did this all happen from your perspective? Where were you? What were you doing when you found that you were being blamed for the Washington catastrophe?
Thank you for having me, Michael.
So I saw very little blaming of Joe Ellis for the Washington catastrophe. What I did see were a lot of inquiries that mounted as Michael Smerconish and Joe Ellis and people who were in possession of the facts refused to respond to 20, 24, 28, 30, 32, 34 hours of public inquiries. So what I primarily heard were, where's Joe Ellis? Joe Ellis let us know publicly that she's based in Virginia and that she had 500 training hours, just like the female pilot of this plane.
I want to reiterate that I'm speaking in a personal status, not representing the National Guard, U.S. Army, or Department of Defense.
Okay, I think you can imagine what she's going to talk about. And any normal human person would feel terrible for what happened to her. So just as if your friend chooses to go to work in a really vicious workplace and people warned him, hey, don't do that, it's really vicious there, and then your friend goes there and he loses his mind because it was so vicious, right? You feel bad for the person being subjected to levels of, say, mockery or scorn or competition in the workplace that was not suited for his delicate soul. You'd feel bad. If you want a woman, hey, don't go out with this guy. There are credible accusations of rape against him. There are credible accusations that he spreads STDs. Don't go out with him. And the woman goes out with him, gets raped, gets an STD, and gets pregnant. Right? You'd still feel bad even though people warned her. And so if I had a sponsee who was new to Los Angeles, and she liked to drive around to different parts of Los Angeles and walk around alone at night. And I suggested to her that some of the places that she liked to walk around alone at night in Los Angeles, that was not wise. Now, if I'm sure I was not the first person to suggest this to her, and so if something terrible happened to her while she was walking alone at night in Los Angeles after many people had warned her, you'd still feel bad for her as a normal person, while also recognizing that she created the conditions for this awful thing to happen. If many people warn you, do not go into business with Joe. You choose to go into business with Joe, and then Joe does exactly what many people warned you about. He rips you off. Right? If this is your friend, you still feel bad that he's lost his life savings, even though all sorts of people tried to warn him. So you go public with intimate details about your life, or you simply tell people at work or tell people at your synagogue all sorts of intimate details about your life, then you get hurt when they start speculating and gossiping about that. Right? You created the situation. And any normal person is going to feel bad for what Joe Ellis went through. At the same time, Joe Ellis was an essential condition for what happened. If she'd never gone public, if she'd responded promptly, or Smerconish had responded promptly, or someone in the know had responded promptly, this never would have happened. So think once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times before you tell intimate details of your life to the public. It may not go as you wish.
Class action lawsuit moving its way slowly through the courts that was filed by people who were, under that old policy, denied jobs because they were white. So this is a legit thing. It's not a conspiracy theory. However, the way he links all this stuff just makes me think he's just terribly online in a way that, because this stuff was flowing over social media in real time in a way that it just came out of his mouth like a fire hose. But I'll cede to Jim on how much of what he said was conspiracy versus true.
Well, this is a funny thing about Trump is the first thing is he'll say something kind of on impulse that is maybe at the wrong time, seems inappropriate. Certainly speculate. The president shouldn't be speculating about anything with a plane crash until the investigations begin. But you're absolutely right, Christine. When the problem with DEI isn't just that, maybe they lowered standards and there's some people there that aren't fully qualified. In the case that you're talking about, they had a program to make sure they didn't hire too many white people. They had this wild test. This dates back to the Obama era. They had this test that after you had spent, in some cases, years going to college, getting lots of training to become qualified to take the air traffic control test, there was a personal questionnaire that people didn't know about. You couldn't study for it, and would ask you all these questions about your life and what you liked in high school, and did you play a musical instrument or something like that. But the answers were geared to try to favor minorities and weed out white people, which is kind of hard to believe that you could do that. But for example, one of the questions was, if I have it, one question was my lowest grade in high school was science. If you checked that was good. That would help you get over. So, let's weed out people who are good at, science and math as air traffic controllers. And then there was a group of black air traffic controllers who got their hands on this test, and they were distributing the answers to people that they wanted to pass the test. So it was a big scandal. As you say, there's this class action lawsuit making its way through the courts. Now, that is no longer the case, but it shows you
So I know quite a few communities where once they get their hands on the test, that they are quite promiscuous with sharing the test with members of their community. It's an example of where a group strategy will tend to outcompete the individual strategy.
Mentality in the agency that was working to restrict the number of white candidates for those jobs at a time when we've been hearing for years about these shortages. The New York Times did a big investigation a couple of years ago into these shortages, these shortfalls in employment. So people are working overtime. They're working 7 days a week. These places are understaffed, and the tower at Reagan was not only overstaffed the night of the accident. What's that?
Understaffed.
Understaffed. Yeah. Was not only understaffed, but one of the air traffic controllers had given permission to leave early for some reason. And so the poor guy who was on duty was handling both the fixed wing airplane traffic and the helicopter traffic. Those are those operate on different radio frequencies. It's a huge cognitive challenge to manage all this stuff. And, the preliminary look is, at the very least, the air traffic control could have been more proactive at warning the helicopter, warning the pilot. And really the only thing we really hear is that he called the helicopter pilot and said, do you have visual on that aircraft, and you're supposed to go in behind him, and the pilot confirmed it. It's looking like the pilot was looking at the helicopter pilot was maybe looking at the wrong aircraft. There was another one lined up at a slightly different angle, the angle that would have been expected farther in the distance.
Okay, Marc Halperin had Marc Andreessen on Friday afternoon. I've listened to a bunch of Marc Andreessen interviews over the past 6 weeks. I find Marc Andreessen incredibly impressive and honest and a valuable use of my time.
Of the episode, talking to our guest. Very pleased to have him here. Marc Andreessen has been a successful business person and an understander of startups and technology. I chose the wrong Marc Andreessen. Look at that, because I got a couple here. But what he has been of late is one of the finest podcast and interview guests around. All right, let's see what's happening here. Needs to turn on his camera, please. I look at him as a great anthropologist and a great sociologist. I think his understanding of not just the culture of Silicon Valley, which he understands incredibly well, or business, but understanding wider American culture. I've listened to a lot of and read a lot of the interviews he's done in the last few months, and I find them extraordinarily insightful in a way that not many people can be about what's happening in America. So I welcome in the modern-day de Tocqueville, Marc Andreessen, because Wisconsin's a lot like France, right? Stranger in a strange land.
if you say so.
Yeah. Thank you for making time. Very, very grateful to you. And again, I've loved the interviews I've listened to you with. There you go.
Oh wait, Paris.
There you go.
There we go.
Paris, and I love the purple couch.
I'm going.
My policy is to try to ask only questions you've never been asked. That's my aspiration, because it's boring for you to answer the same questions over and over again, and people have heard your answer. So each time, if you want to say never been asked it or been asked it, you feel free to do it. Otherwise, we'll just see from your tone. And again, very grateful to you for making time. If you want to get in on the conversation, please raise your hand. The press and the Democrats cast the participation in the transition and now in the government by, I'll call them your colleagues, very successful business people, many from San Francisco Bay Area, as they're there because they're power hungry, or they're there because they want to help their business. They're looking to either their industry, lower regulation, less taxes, or their own personal businesses. Like Musk is there to be soft on China because he wants to do business with China. I tend to ascribe more positive motives to people. What's your sense of why they want to be there? Why are they you've done this too. You've given up time for your day job to spend time helping the Trump administration. Maybe not every motive's the same, but in general, how would you describe the motives of the people doing it?
Yeah. So first, thanks. It's great to be here. Long time listener, first time caller. Start by saying, look, I'm not, I play no formal role, and just disclaimer up front, which is I can't speak for the administration on Yes.
I don't want you to peace, love, and understanding. I'm not asking you to be unduly critical, but you're such a keen observer of this. And in your previous interviews, you've talked about the kind of eye-opening posture of the Biden administration towards regulation, towards innovation, towards government control. How should history understand that the administration had a vice president from Northern California who's been around the tech world forever, and that apparently did not ameliorate the problem? How do you understand that?
So I'll start by saying the sort of anti-tech sentiment or animus, and by the way, there's some anti-tech sentiment on both sides, right? So it's not like there's a pure thing here. But the anti-tech animus on the Democratic side, I think in retrospect, started in around 2012, 2013. It was sort of after the Obama re-election where, by the way, they were super positive about tech through the election, and there were magazine cover stories about how social media was wonderful because it got Obama reelected. But really, the sort of left-wing anti-tech energy started to form up 2013, 2014. We started feeling it in our companies back then. You started seeing it in the press. And then, obviously the Trump nomination election catalyzed it, and, everything blew sky high with the Cambridge Analytica scandal and everything that followed. And then there was the sort of strange first Trump term from our standpoint, which is, he was kind of in charge of the government, but also a lot of arms of the government were becoming much more radicalized against tech during that period, and kind of doing things in retrospect he probably wouldn't agree with. And then to your question, basically the Biden administration just turned out to be just much more radical than we were expecting. And, honestly, the first year and a half or 2 years, the Biden sort of term were very strange for us because just the world had gotten bizarre because of COVID and, every other crazy thing that was happening. But also the Biden administration just started coming at us in a much more, I would say, direct and brutal assault, meaning coming at our companies and coming at our industry and, really trying hard to, destroy entire sectors of tech and destroy entire sort of swaths of what we consider to be kind of startup land, and really coming hard after companies, coming after our founders. I've talked elsewhere about, the debanking phenomenon, started hitting really hard. We started having lots of founders and companies literally kicked out of the banking system. And so, the first 2 years of that were disorienting because it was just so different than what we were used to. And it took us a while, our initial inclination was just keep our head down, hope it passes. And then it didn't pass. And then it was sort of, in our view, our response to that was we have to go get involved in that. And then, for the last 2 years, it was more of a fight, because we were actually in there kind of punching back. But frankly, it wasn't going that well. Vice President Harris.
Go ahead. Well, just during those 4 years, did anyone in any discussion ever say, "Hey, let's call the vice president. She's from Northern California. A lot of us have given her money. She's talked favorably about the tech sector and its importance to California and the world." Did anyone ever say that? Let's do that.
So Vice President Harris is somebody we've known for a long time. I know her. I've known her probably since 2010. My wife knows her very well. My partner Ben has had her at his house many times. His wife Felicia, my partner Ben's wife Felicia, sat next to a vice president at church for many years in San Francisco. Yes, there were some conversations and so forth. Obviously, ultimately nothing productive. I would say we do have this fairly bizarre phenomenon where our politicians in California also hate us, and so
not all of them. Not all of them.
It's pretty hard to find. Our own hometown Congress people don't like us. Our governor doesn't like us.
Congressman Connor likes you.
Congressman Connor likes us sometimes. Okay. He likes us now. There was a long time when he didn't. I supported. So here's a good example. I supported Roe. So I supported Roe in his initial race, and this was when I was doing much smaller scale. But Roe's like, yeah, I'm a young guy, and I understand tech, and I'm going to take out this incumbent, and it's be much better. And he said yeah, I'm going to be very pro business and so forth. And then and he went in, and then he turns right around. He's the co-chair of Bernie Sanders presidential campaign.
Bernie likes the internet.
Bernie doesn't like us. And so, look, and Roe has to do what Roe has to do, but, he decided that he had to kind of orient against us. And so my read is the vice president also had to do that, which is just as the Democratic Party became, whatever you want to call it, more radicalized, more extreme, more emphatic, let's say, on business issues, corporate issues, tech issues, internet issues, as sort of the censorship, program, as the social media issues ramped up, and as they became anti-crypto, anti-Facebook, and then as they really started engaging hard on AI policy, they, just kind of, Bernie almost won. Bernie arguably won the 2016 nomination. That's a different Democratic Party than the Clinton-Gore party. Yeah. And so my view is just the vice president and others, including, by the way, Biden himself, kind of got wrapped up in this more radicalized thing. And by the time they realized the consequences of it, it was too late.
Let me ask you one more question about her. And again, I know you're not speaking for her, and you're not, but you're a great reporter. And as you listed, a ton of people who know her really well, right? Yeah. She obviously, if you said to her in an interview, how important is the tech? Is America's high tech? She'd say, "Oh my goodness, it's one of the crown jewels of the country of California." I'm pretty sure she'd say that. She wouldn't say she might have some problems with Facebook 2016, whatever. But do you think that she in her actual position is you guys need to be highly regulated and you're evil, or do you think her position is you're great, but the party's moved so far to the left, I have to take that position?
Would it shock you if I said that I'm not sure she has actual positions?
It would not.
Right. Great point. I mean, he's a great guest. We should respect and appreciate his contributions.
They want to offer new kinds of financial services, and so there's a similar kind of pressure there. And then
Okay, here he's talking about debanking.
In the credit card system, there's credit card blacklists where you get kicked out. You can't.
Okay, let me get back to the beginning here.
These are not people with $1,000 checking accounts. They have relationships with their private bankers in these large banks. Their lawyers sometimes are dealing with stuff. Just on an interpersonal basis, it just seems strange. Say you must close your account. Like did people of your portfolio companies, did they appeal? Did you call Jamie Dimon and say, Jamie, stop debanking us?
Yes. Oh, yes. We had this conversation many times, including with CEOs.
And what did the CEOs say? My hands are tied. The government's making me?
They said under the Bank Secrecy Act, we can't tell you why we're doing what we're doing.
And did anybody go to court over it?
There have been challenges, but you're in this zone. There have been challenges, but you're in this zone where, in theory, what you're dealing with is a private actor, right? And so there's no law that says the bank has to take a client, right? And this is not like a case of racial discrimination, so like civil rights law doesn't apply. So the bank is acting as a private entity, except of course is the bank acting as a private entity because what you know is happening, right? But you can't necessarily prove is that it's pressure from the government.
So they say you must close down your account, so you take your money, and then you start dialing around, and you start going down to banks you've never heard of, right?
Yes, and you find out that you can't get accounts at those banks either. Right, and so and then you're in real trouble. And by the way, debanking is kind of the shorthand, but it's like bank accounts and then its ability to transact credit card transactions. You can get kicked out of the credit. There's an analogous thing that happens in the credit card system. There's credit card blacklists where you get kicked out. You can't have a business that processes credit cards or debit cards. There's also you can get blocked out of being able to get home insurance. You can get blocked out of being able to get car insurance. You can get blocked out of being able to get mortgages. And so so what it is it's the domestic equivalent of the foreign sanctions regime that we use on hostile regimes like Iran and North Korea, except it's not a formal action by the U.S. government. It's an implicit activity that's happening through some combination of federal pressure and bank voluntary choice, deliberately obscured behind the cloak of this Bank Secrecy Act. Let me just continue though. Who's getting debanked?
Please do.
It's the crypto companies. It's what we call the fintech companies. So it's the financial services startups that are not themselves crypto companies, but they are they want to offer new kinds of financial services, and so there's a similar kind of pressure there. And then there's something like extremely dangerous and damaging, which is of course political debanking. And this has become a hot topic recently because you probably saw the president was on this video thing with into Davos, and the CEO of Bank of America, and Trump said on the call, he said, by the way, you're debanking conservatives. You need to stop doing that. The Bank of America put out a statement saying we would never debank a conservative. I've heard the same thing from other bank CEOs. If you talk to people who were in the first Trump administration, a very common story that you hear is that officials from the first Trump administration got debanked after 2021. They just got flat out blitzed out. A number of them actually ended up at a very small bank where they all hope that nobody points out who the bank is because it's like the last bank in America that they can get banked at.
Yep.
And then the kicker to the whole thing was, I'll just give you the two kickers we discovered in the last few weeks. So one is Melania Trump published her book, and she doesn't talk in public much, but she says in the book that she and Barron both got debanked after Trump left office. Right. And so I guess it's possible that Melania and 16-year-old Barron were involved in some global crime conspiracy. I don't think that's actually the case. I think they were just happened to be family members. And then the other thing that just came out this week that actually shocked me, which is there's a guy named Roelof Botha, who is the head of one of the top Silicon Valley venture capital firms, one of our peer firms called Sequoia. And this guy is a pillar of the American he's a great immigrant success story, incredibly successful entrepreneur, and then head of Sequoia, incredibly successful guy, blue chip in every possible respect. And he just gave an interview literally 3 days ago where he said, oh, by the way, he said he got debanked in 2019 for reasons that were never explained to him, by the way, by Bank of America. Yeah. And so this thing has been ripping for years. And there's and this accompanies this intense assault by these same government agencies trying to, come after these industries like crypto and fintech. And so obviously what's happening here is an intertwining of state power and private entities, that is, it's illegal for the government. It's illegal for the government. It's unconstitutional for the government to take something that it itself cannot do and then to, coerce or require or strong arm a private entity into doing that thing. And of course, that's exactly what's been happening here. So the bureaucracies in the government built a financial Death Star to be aimed at their domestic enemies, and it ran unchallenged basically until this handover. And then maybe where we are today is both the House and the Senate, with the turnover of everything. There are hearings coming up where this is going to be fully kind of unrest in Congress. And so we'll see what happens.
And so Steve Bannon is just furious at people like Marc Andreessen, and I don't see a justifiable reason for him to be furious. Marc Andreessen, I think, was speaking openly, honestly, addressing important issues. But Steve Bannon has just lost his mind with hatred for these guys. And I think it's Steve Bannon who looks terrible. I listened to Steve Bannon here, and I think he resents that Elon Musk has a role with Trump that Steve Bannon, never had. Right? It just comes off to me. Tell me what you think. It just comes off to me as Steve Bannon is mad at the tech oligarchs embracing Donald Trump because they are a rival center of power. This just seems like his petty ego that Steve Bannon is creating the most absurd arguments to try to push his case against the tech oligarchy. And what it just comes down to is he's not as important. His ego is threatened by the rise of Elon Musk. Right? I think Steve Bannon comes off terribly, and I think Marc Andreessen, in his recent interviews, comes off very impressively. This is Ross Douthat talking with Steve Bannon.
Because I believe in soak the rich. Maybe I do, but I would not want to be part of policy.
Yeah, Steve Bannon resents the super rich, right? He just hates them.
I want to do that to get our financial house in order because we just can't keep borrowing at $1 trillion every 100 days. So, yes, if we can't balance it, in addition with the more tax cuts for the working class, particularly Social Security.
Right. So he sounds sane. He sounds impressive. And then to me, it just feels like this is just his ego speaking. This isn't his concern for America.
Then that gap, we got to close that gap from $2 trillion. And CBO backs me up. House Freedom Caucus says it's going to be $2 trillion a year. We got to close that. I think it's spending cuts. And if it has to be, increase taxes. Not just they don't get the tax cuts reinstalled from Trump 17, but you actually increase taxes on these people. And that, I believe in incentives. I think, Ross, that will incentivize the donor class to get focused on cutting government spending. Let's make them part of the process. So that's the only way we can do it. And, when I mention tax cuts, and I'm going to tell you, when I go around and give speeches, I gave one to Wall Street, a third of the audience of a Wall Street crowd standing ovation. 2/3, 1/3 didn't applaud, and 1/3 spit on the floor. But when I go to Denton, Texas, and places like that, and I say this program about increased tax for wealthy, standing ovation. The people are there and the voters are there.
I think you're totally right that there is a big constituency, especially now that the party has been transformed, of Republican and populist-leaning Republican voters who would be fine with some soaking the rich in the context of a bigger budget deal. I'm completely skeptical that there is any large-scale elite faction, including everyone you just described, who are fanning out over the agencies, that would be up for that beyond, on the margins. Can the Trump administration tax university endowments? Sure, absolutely. They can do that. Just maintaining the changes to the state and local tax deduction that was, I think, one of the genuinely populist victories of the first Trump term, and I should say it soaked me, right? It soaked the upper middle class in blue states. Just maintaining that, I think, will be challenging. But I want to turn us and bring us back to where we started, I guess, because the last conversation I had ended with me arguing with the guest, who was Marc Andreessen, the Silicon Valley venture capitalist, about whether he and his allies, who also have a big role in the Trump administration, who are filling a lot of jobs, could easily find big spending cuts. I'm just generally a skeptic of the ability to find big spending cuts. So maybe that's one small point of overlap between you and I won't call them the tech right.
Why haven't we been told who
Silicon Valley people who support Donald Trump?
No, Ross,
we don't even have to go into the overlap.
Stop. No, I'm not going to. You're too smart. You're one of the.
Okay, so here you see just raw ego and caffeine emerging. So he's drinking. Steve Bannon is seen sipping an energy drink as he does this.
Leading public intellectuals.
I'm not one of.
No, you are. They're oligarchs. They're 100% oligarchs. They believe in techno-feudalism. Look, they're all down here for one reason. They either knew we were going to win, they were smart enough to look at the math, or they saw after we won. I mean, Facebook's Damascene moment wasn't until 10 o'clock that night. Now he's down there. They're oligarchs who believe in techno-feudalism. They have nothing. They're not even on the spectrum where we can argue against Rachel Maddow and AOC and Bernie Sanders on the spectrum of they're not on the spectrum.
So
they're not a different thing.
This phrase is sitting here in my notes because you've used it a bunch. Techno-feudalism. We've talked about immigration, right? You've talked about the idea that Silicon Valley is basically trying to bring in as much foreign labor as possible to presumably keep its own costs down. That's obviously part of what you mean by techno-feudalism. But I don't think that's all of it, right? This is not just about H-1B visas. Suppose Elon Musk came in tomorrow and said, it's fine, I'm reforming the H-1B program. You would still disagree with him. So give me a broader view of what you think is wrong with the Silicon Valley view.
Just a quick bunch of history. The Obama is the most, in the progressive administration, him and Biden, the most reactionary in American history. Number one, he made a Faustian bargain with the sociopathic overlords in Wall Street to bail us out of the 2008 crisis, which still hasn't been resolved. At the same time, the Obama and the established order went to Silicon Valley and made a deal with them. And the deal was the following. We will allow you to become the wealthiest people in the history of the world. We will let you create an apartheid state. We will let you become monopolies. We will get no anti-trade. In fact, that's why you...
So, apartheid state, that sounds terrible. but it's just dramatic overstatement to try to grab your attention. I don't think Steve Bannon is describing something accurately. He is making spectacular, disproportionate, and unhinged claims here.
You got Google and search, you got Facebook and what they do, you got Twitter and what they do, you've got Amazon destroying small business for the CCP. Every one of these guys is a monopoly in the Justice Department for 10 or 12 years has just looked the other way. So we'll let you become monopolies. We'll let you become the wealthiest people on earth. But here's the bargain. Here's what you have to do. You have to make the hegemon, the United States, and the post-war international rules-based order and the ruling class of this country, you have to make us a dominant technological power of which we have the commanding heights can never be questioned. And over the last 72 hours, what we've seen is two things. Number one, in social media, the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA created TikTok, which is far more powerful than all the social media platforms of these guys put together, right? Forget that they use
That's absurd. That TikTok is more powerful than all other social media platforms put together. Absurd.
Information and the ownership. I'm just talking about the addictive nature and how evil can be put in there. And we now know that all the really, let's say hundreds of billions of dollars, not tens of billions, that we put into the theory of the case of blunt force computing power that, the Green New Deal's forgotten, climate change is forgotten. You got to build.
All right, this is idiotic analysis. All right, DeepSeek did not invalidate the tens of billions of dollars that Americans have invested in chips and AI.
Power generators everywhere. You got to give over federal land for data centers everywhere. We got to burn more coal, more oil for these data centers because our method of AI, we understand that if this is not a psyop, which I don't think it totally is, we've had our Sputnik moment. And guess what? The oligarchs that we created, who were all progressive Democrats, absolutely fucking face planted. Now, here's the point. In techno-feudalism, you're just a digital serf. You're valued as a human being. As someone built and made in the image and likeness of God and endowed with the life spirit of the Holy Spirit is not, they don't consider that. Everything's digital to them. They are, at the end of the day, transhumanist. And what is transhumanist? Transhumanist is somebody sees Homo sapien here and Homo sapien plus, right? Plus on the other side, what they call the singularity. And that's why they're all rushing, whether it's artificial intelligence, regenerative robotics, quantum computing, advanced chip design, CRISPR.
Okay, what I'm hearing here are elaborate justifications for why Steve Bannon resents the tech bros' influence on Donald Trump, and he feels that he is being marginalized by contrast with that. Right? I just don't get a coherent argument here that the tech bros are terrible because they're transhumanists. This doesn't ring true to me.
Biotech, all of it to come to this point of which the oligarchs are going to lead that revolution. And why are they going to do it? Number one, when you get to know them and see where they're spending the money, it's because they want eternal life. You know why? Because they're complete atheistic 11-year-old boys that are kind of science fiction, Dungeons and Dragons guys. And we've turned the nation over to that. And yes, I'm going to fight it every fucking step of the way. This is taken as...
He hates them because they're transhumanists and atheists. No, you hate them because they have influence on Donald Trump that you believe belongs to you. You resent that they took your place in the playpen.
This back a millennium to feudalism. This is what their business model is based upon that. And the progressive left made a deal with these guys. They're all lefties. Elon had the first awakening because he could kind of, as an engineer, he could kind of see the math. He fully supported our plan of a base plus election to go get the low information voters.
Right? These guys are all lefties? No, they're primarily business people. They're politically eclectic. They're not all lefties, transhumanists, atheists.
And the Moms for America, who had flipped during the pandemic, he backed that strategy, and the dude wrote a $250 million check over...
Yeah. People in business respond to incentives.
5 months, unprecedented, to back our play. He's the first, but the rest of them, even Andreessen, they're all super progressive liberals. They're all techno-feudalists. They don't give a flying fuck about the human being, and I don't care if you're black, white, Hispanic, Chinese. They don't care. And they have to be...
So I played some excerpts from Marc Andreessen. Do you think this is an accurate portrayal of Marc Andreessen? I think this is an unhinged rant from Steve Bannon, who's mad that the tech bros have influence on Donald Trump that he believes belongs solely to him.
Be stopped. If we don't stop it, and we don't stop it now, it's going to destroy, not just this country, it's going to destroy the world. And you've seen this artificial intelligence. We have no controls over this. We've allowed these monopolies to exist, and now we know they're getting their ass handed to them, I think, by the Chinese Communist Party. We're in deep shit right now. We're in a crisis.
All right.
We're not getting our ass handed to us by the Chinese Communist Party. All right. That was such a hyperbolic, unhinged rant that I think that it comes from a place of deep hurt. And the deep hurt is, hey, Elon Musk has a closeness to Donald Trump that I thought belonged to me. I want to be that close and that influential and that admired by Donald Trump. I want what Elon has, and I resent that there are all these tech bros with honored places at the inauguration, and they're going on podcasts and all that attention. It belongs to me, and so I'm going to lash out because my ego has been threatened by other people's success. Right? That's just what his unhinged rant felt like to me. And I think that Steve Bannon sometimes makes some powerful contributions, but it felt to me like he was talking there from a place of ego. It just seemed like such an unhinged rant. The tech bros are bad because they're transhumanists and they're atheists and they're into AI. That doesn't ring true to me.
I want to go to the transhumanist stuff first, and then to the policy stuff and Trump and whether any of this can be stopped. So to me, I think that there are different groups in Silicon Valley. I think that you're right that generally people, including readers of this newspaper, listeners of this podcast, underestimate just how weird the long-term ambitions of a...
Bannon did 4 months in prison. You'd lash out 240. He did 4 months in prison because he chose to, because he defined a congressional subpoena. Right? So that was entirely his choice because he thought it would make him appear heroic if he defied a congressional subpoena. That was entirely his choice. It was an idiotic choice. Right? It was a histrionic choice. It was the same kind of histrionic Steve Bannon that we're listening to here.
A lot of people deeply involved in Silicon Valley are, especially around artificial intelligence, and that there is this sort of...
Balaj and the network state.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. They're not weird.
Well,
they're radicals. Right. They're radicals.
That's a yeah, the network state we can save for the next time I have you on. For now, let's just focus on transhumanism. You're going to be invited.
We got breaking news. Bannon's actually going to be invited back.
We're going to every week, man. So listen. So the transhumanism stuff, though. So to me, it seemed like one of the things that pulled Elon Musk into the conservative coalition was that while he's certainly not a religious conservative, but he is a kind of weirdo humanist, right? He likes the human race. He wants the human race to continue.
Stop.
No, okay.
Stop,
so you don't see. To me, it seems like Musk is in one group.
Musk is
just as transhumanist as the rest of them.
No, since Edison, maybe our greatest applied engineer.
Okay,
he is a genius in that level. Agreed. And so he looks at the thing as all kind of mathematical equations and from engineering in a big brain. When he puts on something, he can solve it. He is the most prominent of that crowd that's warned against artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence. It's one of the reasons he and the Altman at OpenAI have had so many big fights. Besides
not big fans of each other. Yep.
They hate each other. I mean, and part of that's personal, but part of it is philosophical. And Brother Musk is probably the farthest down the line because he's the most advanced in shipping. So I think Neuralink is one of the most aggressive about Homo sapien 1.0 or Homo sapien 2.0. Elon is at the tip of this, and Elon is actually on an applied engineering basis, not bullshit talk. He is probably the farthest advanced for transhumanism. People have to understand in the life, and I say life, next 10 years of your audience, we're going to be facing a dilemma for yourself and your kids. Do you enhance yourself? Do you enhance yourself either by genetic engineering? Do you enhance yourself by advanced chip design plugged into you? Do you advance yourself by artificial intelligence? Elon's one of the top accelerationists about driving this thing faster at accelerating at an increasing rate. You're going to have to make a choice in your own life, not just politically in society, your own life. Do I do this? Am I a Luddite? Will I get left behind? More importantly, will my children get left behind? Do my children have a shot to really play sports in the Division I level? Or do my kids have an ability to go to an Ivy League school unless I get them enhanced? These questions, deep questions, never before handled in mankind's history, are going to happen and going to happen in the next couple of years.
But so let's then take it back to politics, right? I don't see this critique.
Okay, let's carry on in about 11 hours. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.